If in the course of this proceeding you continue to operate you buy new radios or you continue to violate the rules, the commission can also go to an in rem proceeding and we can come out with marshals and take the equipment. And at that point, Dave and his team gets to have a party and destroy it with hammers.
We had an absolutely fascinating video drop a couple of months ago. Actually, it was before I made my video on how to deal with people who interfere on the amateur radio bands, both HF and VHF. Go watch that if you haven't. It's probably actually a good starting point for where you're going to hear me coming from on this video. But this banquet was set up out on the East Coast. It was the 2-1 repeater group, and you can see the name there. Tommy KA3TKW set this up, and it's a group. They run a repeater. Sounds like a good group of hams that also have a GMRS repeater among some other stuff. And they had a number of FCC enforcement individuals, including Laura Smith, who is basically the lead of enforcement for amateur radio. And they talked about GMRS repeaters and amateur radio repeaters. This is focused on repeaters primarily. But there's some really, really, really important insights that we're going to walk through. This is a 2-hour-long video over how I do it. They haven't posted videos in many, many years, but they came out of the woodworks to drop this hot banger, and I absolutely appreciate it. So you should go check out this video. I do highly recommend you watch the whole thing. The link is in the description. It is 2 hours long, but it covers a lot of information. Even, going to talk a little bit about possibly knocking on doors. Spoiler alert, they're not recommending it at this banquet. Let's go ahead and look through some of this, and I want to make sure we get the introductions of these people out of the way because they're actually very, very important individuals, and we're going to hear some of their major points on how to deal with interference, but also how fines work. It's really popular right now to talk about FCC fines in the past, and we're talking about 6 or 7 a year maybe that affect amateur radio, CB, GMRS, the services that the regular humans use, not the big business licenses. And it's fun to go back in time and read up the write-ups, but I actually wanted to hear from the people, what's the actual process? What are they really doing? And they talk about it in this video. So let's go ahead and cue it up, and we'll talk through some of this. Now, it could be hard to tell, and I'll do my best to highlight everybody, but right here is Riley Hollinsworth. And so Riley used to hold the position that Laura Smith now does, which is enforcement, the management of amateur radio enforcement. Sounds like Laura also helps out with GMRS enforcement as well. So you have Riley Hollinsworth, who's retired. He's an amateur radio operator. He's a luminary in the amateur radio space. He has a number of really, really great talks that he's done over the years at Hamvention. I'll link to that as well. The Big Knob, Turn the Big Knob. That's his talk, and it's a really good one. So next to him is Laura Smith. She is the amateur radio enforcement chief for the FCC Enforcement Bureau. Remember, this is all enforcement. This is not policy. So asking, can we change technician privileges, for instance? Not this group. These are people that are primarily interested in enforcement. Next to her is David Dombrowski, FCC Region 1 Enforcement. So I think he's also handling GMRS. Next to him is Al, I believe. Al didn't give a whole lot of information, but it's Al, Columbia Office for Investigations. He was licensed in 79, 29 years in Special Forces, so thank you for your service, Al. Next to him is Jeff DiPolo, WN3A. He's the ARRL Eastern Pennsylvania Technical Coordinator and basically also does repeater coordination. So if you didn't know this, the FCC doesn't manage frequency pairs for repeaters. Amateur radio operators do. We do it so the FCC doesn't have to get involved. The less that FCC gets involved, the less onerous processes we have to do, and all we have to do is we got to work well together. And that's what Jeff does as far as his area, Eastern Pennsylvania, or the area around there. I don't know how big his jurisdiction is, but next to him is Bob Familia, K3RF, and he is an ARRL lawyer, primarily working in the area of, as he says, antenna rights, frequency advocacy, all those things that we want the ARRL to do for us, right? Protecting frequencies, going after the HOAs, maybe letting them loosen up a bit so we can put up antennas at our home. So after I got through the lineup of everybody that was in attendance to this banquet, I was thinking to myself, how did this repeater group get so many of these individuals in this room? And it turns out that this discussion actually had to be approved by the chairwoman of the FCC, which is, had to go all the way up the chain and then back down to let them do that. But I noticed it was at an Asian banquet restaurant thing. So I think it was definitely the
Eating a meal, a succulent Chinese meal,
that got them to actually come here, because I bet the food is absolutely on point here. So I'm glad that they were able to do this. This is a really interesting talk, guys, and I hope you stick around. We're going to dive into this into the form of investigation. So what does the FCC do if an amateur radio or anyone reaches out with a complaint about someone erroneously or intentionally using their radio to cause interference? And ultimately, what happens when they get to fines? Do you think it's just that they throw a letter in your mailbox and they're done with you? No.
But today we're more complaint-driven, public safety being our number one priority. Have to respond within 24 hours of a complaint filed by public.
Remember that. Why are they not necessarily going after the amateur radio complaints? First responders, they got a 24-hour cycle time to respond.
Public safety entities. That could be federal, like Coast Guard and FAA, or state, local emergency services.
So
the next level is enterprise wireless. They are commercial providers, like your broadcasters and who have commercial interests. Your cellular companies, microwave companies, land mobile. If they have interference, they complain to us. And those complaints usually have to be worked between 2 and 5 days. At least contact it and develop a plan of action. Next is unlicensed operation and operation at variance from the license. So those are the complaints we put at our third tier. Under that is pirate radio. Pirate radio is a big project we've been working on. It's taken a lot of our resources, legal and engineering resources. It was Congress that gave us additional authorities to increase the fines against pirate operators. It went from $10,000 a day for a violation to $100,000. And the maximum we could issue for multiple days of operation is not only, it was just I think $100,000 it used to be. Now it's a maximum of $2 million. And I'll talk in a minute.
Oh my goodness, that is a crazy amount of money for running a pirate radio station. Holy smokes! So, all right, you're hearing. We talked about this right on a previous video. First responders are number one. Then you got people who pay for licenses, broadcasters, etc. Pirate radio, though, is now on the list. Yeah, of course it is. We did mention it before, but I didn't realize the fines were as big as they are. Oh my goodness.
The next level of complaint is the CGB, or Consumer Government Affairs Bureau, consumer complaints. And these are the ones where you would file. They start to come at the lower priority. These are ones that involve reception of broadcast stations, amateur complaints, interference in home electronics equipment, and jamming, to name.
So we're down there at the lower level, right? So the priority is lower, right? Again, should not be new information to anybody, but keep that in mind.
When we get them, we need information from you in those complaints. Tell us when the interference is happening, how often. Give us some really good details. The frequencies involved, who you think it might be involved, where you're hearing the interference.
Hey, who you think is interfering, right? Who do you think it is? Cracking SDR, actually using it to DF the house? Again, okay, put it on the shelf. You don't have to go knock on the door. But if you got the address of the individual, if you look that up and it's an amateur radio operator, there's a call sign listed, that's probably a good indicator that might be the person, or a GMRS license, if you will. All important pieces of information to include in any of these complaints that go to the FCC.
Personal radio services is kind of at the bottom, where we have GMRS, Citizens Radio, broadband, Citizens Band Radio, and multi-use radio services. We used to not do these in around 2016 when we had the modernization. We weren't doing any investigations in these areas. If you do a couple violations and investigate some of those complaints, it has this effect of a deterrence, right?
So very interesting. GMRS and CB guys, you are below the amateur radio operators with regards to your complaints, but that doesn't mean they're not important. So do the same thing, right? You got to still have really good evidence, do really good research, and make sure you have all that on hand. And even then, I don't know that they're going to hit it, but, it's got to be something pretty serious.
And we know that some of these operators are the same ones causing interference to public safety operators. So there's jamming, amateur repeaters and GMRS. They're the same ones doing public safety. So let's hit it down and those are.
Imagine that. The mental condition that might lead you to jam an amateur radio repeater might be the same mental condition that you would have to do a GMRS repeater, and also screw with ambulance drivers or the police or firefighters, paramedics, etc.
When it comes to amateur complaints, let's talk about that process a little bit.
All right, here we go.
When we receive them, they go right to Laura. All right, Laura gets all of them. And so we funnel them to Laura. Laura tries to handle them. She'll make a decision whether she can handle it herself, maybe a phone call, maybe a warning letter. But if it requires some on-scene investigative work, we have a memorandum of understanding with the ARRL that we use the observers to go out and collect that evidence.
For those that are not aware, the ARRL Observers, it is a group of hams or volunteers. Call it filling in the gaps, if you will. So if there's a complaint, maybe there's not enough information, or they want an observer to kind of give the seal of approval that, following the standards and practices that they use that are mandated by the FCC, go out and actually see if they can also capture some information about this interference that's happening, whether it's HF, VHF, UHF, etc.
And then if they can't get compliance, they will file a report with us, and then it comes to Laura, and then Laura decides whether to funnel to the field office. We have a very much of equipment, with direction finding vehicles, as I mentioned, that are home built. We have some spectrum analyzer equipment that we can remotely put in there and collect evidence.
Hey, somebody at the FCC or in the enforcement, I want to see this equipment, or can you email me if you're in the area? Can I come meet you, or maybe can I do a ride along? Can I do an FCC enforcement ride along? Think of we won't include any information, but I'll go with you on one of these things. I'll blur you out. You don't have to have any information, but I want people to understand how much details you guys actually find and what you put into these investigations, because I think, as was mentioned, that this is a good deterrence for people that think that they can just do whatever they want on the radio. So, hey, I'm willing. I'll drive to you. Let me know.
These are cheaper units that we can remote into. It looks at the spectrum. It notifies us when the activity, if a signal exceeds a certain mask.
So they got like a drop-off unit that they can just put somewhere that's local, and they'll use that. They can remote into it. I think I understood that. That's pretty slick.
It will notify us, so we can use this for spurious emission problems and get an idea of what the pattern looks like. And that helps alleviate just having an agent sit there and do the monitoring. So there's a lot of times we use warning letters. The problem with that is we're not getting exposure because they're not released to the public. They're actually sent directly to the operator, and you may not be aware of it. So there's a lot of that going on in the background when we get complaints. But if we do send a field agent out, we need to collect the evidence to support a notice. That could be just a warning letter, like a notice of unlicensed operation. If the problem continues,
here we go.
Then we may issue a notice of apparent liability, which is a fine. Notice of apparent liability says that you willfully and or repeatedly violated the FCC rules. It gives the person who violated the rules an opportunity to respond. They could either pay the fine, ask for a reduction, or they could ask for a payment plan. A lot of times they don't respond. They get them, they just ignore them.
Yeah.
Well, what happens is they now issue a forfeiture order, says now you must pay it because you didn't respond, or we deny the facts that you gave us in the case don't support that we should dismiss this, so we're going to go forward with the violation. After the forfeiture order is issued, they do have an opportunity to appeal, maybe go to hearing. If it has a fine attached to it, it can get sent to the Department of Justice for collection. Pirate Radio, we had several fines in the amount of $2 million for multiple operators in New York, Johnny Peralta, for La Mia Radio in the Bronx, Dexter Blake for Linkage Radio in Mount Vernon.
Now, I got to say, there was actually something that I was kind of interested in checking out when I was in New York, was the pirate radio scene. But I had heard about these crackdowns, and I kind of knew that a lot of the pirate radio systems that were out there or stations that were running were pretty much defunct. You guys tell me in the comments that are in New York if you're still hearing some of those stations or not, or what they're been up to. But I think that a lot of them are pretty much done at this point.
Matthew Bowen for 999 HD in Brooklyn. These stations have been on for over a decade. I mean, long time.
Yeah.
And actually, right now today, I could say they're all off the air.
Say what you will about that. I get those comments all the time from people that, the airwaves should be free. People should just be able to do what they want. And while I deeply, very deeply, have a personal freedom mindset, going back to what we talked about earlier, considering the electromagnetic spectrum, there just isn't that many parking spaces for people. If you think about how wide the actual electromagnetic spectrum is, and you need a parking space for that information, the bandwidth that you're going to put out, even FM broadcasts where these pirates were adjacent to, there's somebody else that's in those spaces, or somebody else that's paying for a license, et cetera, et cetera. So you may inevitably ask, well, how is it that, you have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to be able to have these FM broadcast frequencies? It makes the ability to broadcast from someone like a pirate radio station impossible. And yeah, that's a true statement. I guess the statement could be is go get a job at a radio station and get them to see things your way and change them to play the music that you want. I know that's incredibly difficult, but that's really the only avenue that you have at this point. Whether you agree with that or not, I think that's kind of the truism.
And then in terms of the amateur and GMRS, mentioned a couple fines here. Howard Gorski, 2019, $17,000 for intentional interference to amateur radio. Section 333, harmful interference, causing intentional harmful interference.
Howard got
May 30th, 2023, we issued a fine to Jamie John Leone in Rockford, Illinois. This person was intentionally jamming he had a transmitter that was just putting out what sounded like a digital noise. It was just putting a carrier out with a little bit of modulation on it to interfere with everybody on the CB band.
Literally like a menace on the air, right? That's literally a menace if you have a radio that you're not even monitoring and it's just transmitting noise.
The one case maybe everybody knows, Jonathan Guertez, 467.625 at Steelton, Pennsylvania, transmitting intentional interference, transmitting music in continuous tones, and failing to transmit the call sign or GMRS frequency.
God.
May 30th, 2023, Philip Bardet proposing a penalty of $24,000.
Those are
interfering
big
with
fines.
Amateur Net, the Western Amateur Radio Friendship Association.
WARFA.
And I guess they're weekly net. So we caught them and issued a $24,000 fine. And in June 8th, 2022, Jason Frawley, intentional.
By the way, the WARFA net has been jammed by so many different people. They've all caught fines, and they keep catching fines. And I mentioned Billy. He pulled down like a $25,000 fine. God, I think it was even before COVID or during COVID, the early days of COVID, where, he caught a big old fine. And I think they're still fighting it. They're still trying to appeal it for the claim of First Amendment rights or something along those lines. I actually don't know a lot of the details of those cases other than they pulled down some big fines. And now it's continuing to go.
Interference to U.S. Forestry Services.
Yeah, this is the
As
guy.
the planes were flying over, trying to put out a fire, he was communicating with them and causing interference, and they got fined $34,000.
So that's the largest, it's not amateur radio related because it's first responders, but that's a huge fine, $34,000. And you know what? Every time I mention that case, someone will come out in the comments and tell me that I don't know the background and they want to reach out to me and they want to give me the information, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not against hearing it, but I probably won't do a live stream with that person. I'd like to see some of the information privately before, we talk about it in the open space, like, my YouTube channel, etc. But that one's crazy that you can just, you're going to think you're going to redirect planes. I think it was helicopters. I don't remember, but $34,000. Wow. I just noticed, watch the light on that portrait in the background. It's on the right-hand side. It's slightly ahead timing-wise for the RGB cycle that's going on it. It's kind of making me crazy.
If I do an inspection on your station, you deny me an inspection of the station, it's a violation of 301. That's an instant violation right there. Just kind of have a nice day. And please, don't do that. Because all I'm there is trying to figure things out.
Yeah, okay, there you go, guys. What happens if you don't let anyone, the FCC inspect your location? Remember, you don't have to be a radio operator. You could have a Wi-Fi router that's misbehaving, and the FCC knocks on the door and they ask to inspect something. You're supposed to show them, right? You're supposed to let them, and you could catch a violation by not letting them. That's just how it's going to go.
How many times did you amateur radio operators got to ID yourself on the air? Right. What about your GMRS operators? Depends. Yeah, it's scenarios like that. So the one thing that people don't understand, I listened when I was doing the operation up here with you all's guest that was enjoying your repeater. I heard a conversation go on for 45 minutes. So I reached out to the repeater owner, and I said, you need to let them know that I'm listening. You asked me to be here. I'm going to be here.
Hey, who's got GMRS repeaters in your area, and do you ever hear them use a call sign? I've only heard it during nets, GMRS nets, where they've actually used call signs. Other than that, never, never.
The team I work with we're going to do that. We're going to put stuff up. And what's cool about our technology is I don't have to sit there with it. I can be anywhere in the States and look into it and go, yep, it's coming up. Or go back in historical records and go, yeah, it came up for, that's how we were successful with the one case. If you go to do this stuff, you're going to build a pattern for me. I appreciate that. It might take you 5 minutes to build the pattern. It might take you 5 months. but it will be fun because energy is a great thing, right?
Now, I don't know if you read into that, but he has remote systems that they deploy. A lot of what I think happens now, and again, they're not going to go into total detail on everything, but they have remote stations that they can deploy that can hear the repeater in question, for instance. Let's just take that. Now multiply that by, let's say this nice gentleman, Al, is working on 10 simultaneous cases, right? Trying to build this report. He could set up multiple receivers, remote receivers in different locations, and then just remote into them, or let them basically record when receiving data, and then use whatever it is he does to parse that down to the offender that they're looking for, or multiple offenders that they're looking for. And yeah, there they go. SDRs, man. SDRs have made this a lot easier.
Repeaters, when it comes down to your responsibility working with the repeater owner, is this as great as, don't harass the guy. It's like the speeder going down the road. He's speeding. You're going to speed and tell him stop speeding? So the trooper's sitting going, what, you guys are speeding? You're not going to attack
No. I was trying to tell him not to speed.
Complaint, move along. But we're going to reach out to you, start asking this information. What happened? Okay, let's start off the beginning. I got the complaint. I started working the complaint. So I started building my information in my case. We looked at it. The three of us looked at it, talked to the director and say, hey, this is what the game plan is. So I reached out to Tom. I started having him build a log of what time this guy comes on. No one's ever deputized. If you think you know who it is and you went by the guy's house, like, oh, it's him. Cool. I still have to use my equipment to zero in on it.
Interesting
So
point.
I asked him and his guys he was working with to build a log process to say what time, what was he saying? You have a recording of it. Then I got my equipment in the area and I kept moving my gear around.
So what is that telling us, right? What is that telling us? So you have just a habitual abuser on a repeater. Al's basically saying, build a log of when the user is active. Maybe you use a crack in SDR or something like that, and you find the guy's house, like you drive by his house. Those are all data points that he can use in his investigation, but to be official, he still has to do the investigating, right, with his own equipment. So it helps. I'm assuming it helps a lot, right? I'm assuming he appreciates it because it probably makes it a little bit faster to build a report, but they still got to put it through their machines.
I just had to roll up there a couple days later and go, yep. Now, that's that case.
Good.
The one or the two guys before that incident, it's going on for 2 years now. Same thing. They got me they got me a walk, and then from that intersection, I found where that gentleman was coming from, and he received our talking points too. So that's the whole thing. Some people have to say the FCC is not going to do anything. We are doing something. It's not we're not doing it for you right now. So, but more information, the more crosstalk we have, the more evidence I'm going to build, the more understanding of what's going on here. My partner and I spent 2 days up here and a whole night, and then that magic moment happened, and we slid right on top. It's okay. So I'm not going to knock your door at 9 o'clock at night, but I felt this had to be a direct contact because I said I wanted to stop too, because it does cause a problem.
Direct contact, meaning he did go talk with him, so he knocked on the door, it sounds like.
These cases are legal cases. We're not out there just to pull strings. We're out there to make the corrections and to educate and enforce. I think that's the word I wanted to use.
What are the ramifications for somebody who's crazy enough to ignore a sanction letter from the FCC?
Great question, bud. Give it to Laura.
Are you talking about just a warning letter or a fine? A fine. Okay, so if we find someone and they elect
So literally, like, you must pay dollars to FCC, right? So here we go.
not to pay. What the agency does is they will issue a forfeiture order at that point. Originally, we send out a notice of apparent liability and then a forfeiture order saying we have assessed this fine. If they elect not to pay at that point, then we send it to the Department of Justice. We are a regulatory agency. We are not cops. So we send it to Justice, and then Justice initiates a proceeding. During the course of that proceeding, they will go before a judge, and if the individual shows up, they have the opportunity to present their case, as does the attorney for justice. And if the judge rules in the favor of the agency, then justice has the ability to garnish them. And even if they're on disability from the government, they can still garnish a portion of it, even if it's $1 each month.
How? I don't want to say petty, but this person's like a disabled citizen, and they're like, we're going to get something.
You know what I mean? I'm from around the way. I'm leaving with something.
And they're going to take $1 just because. You know what's funny about that? is the reason she said that is that's probably happened. And so there's an example somewhere of someone who got an FCC fine. They were probably retired, maybe on disability. They were collecting a pension, Social Security, and they got an FCC fine, wouldn't pay it. So they got garnished wages in the term of $1 a month from their Social Security. It's wild.
The United States government tends to get its money no matter how long it takes once they go to that step.
Right.
If in the course of this proceeding you continue to operate you buy new radios or you continue to violate the rules, the commission can also go to an in rem proceeding and we can come out with marshals and take the equipment. And at that point, Dave and his team gets to have a party and destroy it with hammers.
How many complaints do you get? And
big question.
The second part is what's the percentage that end up in an actual fine?
I get between 300 and 400 cases a year. And I happen to actually know that because we were able to run those metrics on our computers. We track everything that comes in via our online system. There is a permanent record. I can't go in and delete your complaint. There's a reason for that. That protects you, that protects me, and that makes sure that the information is contained within the agency. For bookkeeping, we have to have a certain amount of records and keep them for 7 years is the time we keep them. A very small percentage end up going to a case. And the reason is I get a lot of complaints in the amateur arena. Pete interrupted Joe and me today. Great.
Please don't do this. Please. If you are sending complaints to the FCC saying Pete interrupted Joe and I on the air, buddy, come on, man.
Some guy or woman is coming up on our frequency. When, where, who, they provide no details. We get an enormous number of complaints.
Don't do that. Stop it. Get some help.
That provide literally no details. Even if I go back to them and ask for additional details, I don't get them on a general rule.
So think of how much time she has to waste on frivolous complaints that she then turns around and says, hey, you kind of whiffed this one pretty hard there, bud. I need a little bit more details. And then they don't reply to Laura Smith of the FCC. Guys, come on, please.
It was a one and done. They got mad. They filed a complaint. So they went to the online system. To finally answer your question, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 ultimately go to a case. My job is to stand between you and the field agents. It gives you a point of contact, and it makes sure that once we send it to Dave and his team or any of the other regional directors, it is actually colorable, meaning that there is a real case there. And to get to that case, I actually send it to this guy here and ask them to double check before I send it to Dave's team. So there are several layers in between when you file it and when it goes somewhere.
I think that implies 10 to 15 a year, I think. So, again, she's amateur radio, so that's amateur radio complaints that turn into cases.
All the cases that you work and close out, is that something you can look up on the FCC site?
Our case files? No.
I like Laura's already shaking her head no.
That's what you see on the FCC is after all the legal process goes by. It's like looking at
Laura's face.
Law enforcement.
No,
so our casework is.
I love the. Laura's probably got notes that says, "Got the 57th complaint from Jim that Pete interrupted Jim and Toby talking on HF. 57th complaint this year. Ignore round file."
Al, if you would go through, like you receive a complaint about interference and you're coming up and investigating it and you find it, could you please go through the steps between, like, you've gathered your information and you hand it off to Laura for prosecution? What?
Beautiful question. I think this is what we've been waiting for, and we're an hour and 33 minutes in from watching this on my side.
Yeah, no problem. First of all, we throw our hands up in the air and start running around screaming our heads off. Like, why? No, we don't. So I get assigned the case from the director. It gets through the headquarters, comes down to our region if it's in our region. Me and my colleagues will sit down and talk about the case. Due to past experiences, we start talking about it, and then what's our next procedure going forward. But I turn it right from a complaint to a case. So now it's a case. Now it's become an official document type thing. So now I start looking at what can I do remotely, getting the information, and I have to get on scene and make the arrangements, get on scene with the vehicles, taking the right technology with me to go find it. So that technology could be anything from me driving a truck up there to gathering information from what happened a couple times here to going down. I have to go collect with my remote sensors. Knocking on the door is really, really thing that we do.
Here we go, knocking on doors.
or radio jammers and other stuff, we want that resolved right now. There's no problem. We want that done right now. In reality, I don't have to knock on your door. I just collect the information, confirm, deny, confirm who you are. I'm the witness too, and say, okay, cool, and just go, hey, that's what the evidence I have.
So key point there, I hope you got it. If there's like an active interference causer, right? So like an active jammer on a frequency, like that guy they mentioned that just, he put a device on a CB channel and walked away and let it run. They have to stop the jamming, right? It is causing an immediate and persistent problem. If it's a spurious guy who gets drunk and gets on a handy-talkie and, gets on the repeater and starts causing problems and he does it every couple of days, that's a little bit harder to narrow down too. But with the jammer, you got to stop that immediately, right? Because that's an obvious case of an ongoing interference.
Solid evidence? Oh, it's not? Okay, I'll go back out. But if I go to knock on your door or give you the letter, I'm pretty sure my responsibility has been met because I know for sure it's coming from you.
Right.
And that's the procedures. Now, then we start talking back and forth, and Dave's been around for a while with Laura, and my partner back here, Shannon, they've been around a little bit. So it's like, what's the right steps to do? We don't want to do nothing half step because we want to make sure it's the right information. It's all gathering information of the technical violations. That's what we're there for. There's no bias in there. We don't want bias because it jeopardizes the case. So then from there, the evidence goes forward. We start talking to the lawyers. We get the paperwork written up, and they go back and forth. Those lawyers got a lot of work going on there, a lot of work.
Just imagine how much time all this takes. And people, right? That all has to go through this because some yahoo's on a repeater with a Baofeng.
Because the constitutional responsibility is this. Before I accuse you, I'm going to make sure it's you. So when I told you last time I was up here, before I leave, I'm going to make sure I know who it is. Because if I come on scene, I'm not leaving empty-handed. I will not.
I like this guy more and more.
My partner's life and safety or safe factor. And in fact, us knocking the wrong door, believing the wrong person, what have you. So we really get down in the weeds about, we make sure it's coming from that window, from that home, from that, whatever it is. But that's the whole procedure. And then once I hand it off to lawyers, we're done.
Okay, so. Then, Laura, what's your process once you receive it?
Well, once the case gets forwarded for legal, and I actually only handle amateur, but there are a lot of other cases that go before other attorneys in the Enforcement Bureau. We review the case file, and then we have to draft an NAL. The NAL will go through an enormous review process. We have a whole agency full of lawyers, and all of them have an opinion. So it goes through that, and once it has been reviewed and re-reviewed, and we've changed happy to glad and glad to feeling good, and ultimately we get an approval. It then goes to, if it's below $25,000, it will go out at a bureau level. If it's above $25,000, it has to go through yet another review process. Our general counsel will review it. It will go to the commissioners. Then if it's below 25, our bureau chief can sign it. If it's above 25, he has to have a vote of a majority. There are 5 of them. They also...
All those people who, let's go back to the guy that was trying to direct traffic for the plane dropping fire retardant on the wildfire. Think of all the people that this had to go through for him to get the fine. And he's running around saying, you don't know the whole story. You don't know the whole story. These are these people's jobs. This is what they do. And at a professional level, obviously, Al, I think he's pretty smart about the goings on here. Fascinating. This is a fascinating talk.
Have their own legal teams, and they also have more edits. And then ultimately it will go out the door. And then that's a notice of apparent liability.
Notice of apparent liability.
You'll have an opportunity to respond to that. You can either do it in person, in filing, you can pay it. Dave went through the whole litany of what is available to you at that point. At some point, if the agency believes that the notice of apparent liability is legitimate, i.e. that Al and his team have done their job and the case is solid, then we will go to a forfeiture order. That says that the notice of apparent liability is now due and owing to the United States government. You can either pay it at that time or you can appeal it. You can take it to the district courts if you wish. You can file a petition for review and ask that the commission reconsider on its own motion. There are a whole litany of things that are available to you. You can also decide not to pay it, which we talked about earlier. Then we will send that particular one over to justice for enforcement. But at that point, many times the individual will either negotiate a consent decree and bring it down, or they will pay the fine.
It's so many steps. It's so many steps to go after somebody that is just creating interference. Wow. Crazy. Within amateur radio and GMRS and CB. I'm going to leave it at that. That was a fantastic talk. Oh man, these kind of talks don't come around all the time. And the fact that we were able to, that we're able to see it, thanks to, again, How I Do It. Go check out his channel. He's not making a lot of videos. He hasn't been making videos, but I encourage him to keep doing things like this because it was incredibly valuable. Boy, guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I want you to sound off in the chat. Your comments are, I think, really effective and important in this discussion. And again, approach this from, let's work together to make ham radio stick around for 1,000 years. And I appreciate everybody that was on this entire panel. I'll try to do what I can to link where possible, but I know a lot of those people don't have YouTube channels. They're actually out there professionally working for the FCC and a number of other things like the ARRL. If you found this a valuable video, give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing. 73 from me, KI6NAZ.